so
she's hooking us up with all the cool
I'm
stuff.
new and I'm one of the organizers, and this session will be on community values. And the WAIS Workshop has always been designed to be an inclusive workshop that promotes new ideas, and best to do that, we should build inclusive communities. When we started these discussions last year, is a community of what we valued in order to build the best science, in order to have people be most productive. And so, due to survey results from last year, it became clear that people wanted this to be part of the workshop itself. It's one of the major sessions, and so we have done that this year. And we've invited Jane to speak to us a little bit about changing academic culture. Jane's an associate professor at Scripps Institute of Oceanography, and I think with that, I'll just turn it over to her.
So thank you so much for actually staying in the room. I've given talks like this a couple times, and sometimes when it's part of a conference, people leave. It happens more often than you think, and unfortunately, it's often the people who I want to talk to who actually leave the room. So thank you all for sticking around. I think I see the exact same number of seats empty now as before, which is awesome. So I know, so I've done some work mostly on the East Antarctic ice sheet in the past, so I don't know a lot of you. Some of you I know from Twitter, but you might know me from being sexually harassed. There we go. It's out in the open. So, and I also want to apologize a little bit for sometimes adding some levity to topics that are very, very serious, and that is kind of just my personality. I wish I could be serious and somber about everything, but I can't, so I'll just have to, you'll have to make do with my introduction of lame jokes every now and then. So, I've gone to a lot of presentations about what kinds of things in the earth sciences or the geosciences or oceanography that we can change or we need to change. And some of the things that we talk about are that diversity, and by that I don't mean gender diversity necessarily, but I'm talking about racial diversity, ethnic diversity, and that there's a paper that came out in Nature Geoscience a couple of years ago that says that hasn't changed much in 40 years, so that's a big problem, right? There are very few women in senior scientist positions. I think we can maybe look around lots of rooms and notice that. And another one is that students and trainees often feel things like imposter bias or imposter syndrome. I don't know why I put bias there. And so I don't want to call this a hot take because those are often wrong. But I want to kind of reframe it in a different way. So apologies to those of you who were born maybe and didn't early or later and didn't know about this movie, The Matrix. It's not like it's an Austin Powers reference, right? Would be even worse. So in this movie, there's two pills, right? And so one pill, I forget if it's red or blue, you take it and you go about your day and you just live your life as if you always have, nothing changes. You take the other pill, and that's what I want you to think about today. We're taking the other pill. We're going to think about this in a little bit of a different way. And so what if I told you that the problems that we have in academia are not, and I have my Kamala Harris sorry about that. That's another thing I do. What if I told you that diversity in the field is not, the lack of diversity in the field is not the disease. It's not the disease that we have. The fact that there are few senior women, that is not the disease. The fact that students feel imposter syndrome, not the disease. These are all symptoms of something much bigger that I hope we can fix, and I hope we can fix it faster than we have been in the past. So I think that academic culture is a disease. And in particular, my experiences with STEM culture, so I'm going to talk about that most, but it probably exists in other fields as well. In fact, I'm sure it does. And I maintain, and this is my hot take that's not not true, is that if we fix diversity, if we fix academic culture, diversity, women in senior positions, imposter syndrome all sort of go away, right? Okay, this does not mean that this is something that's going to magically happen without any kind of action or activity. The action and activity is also something that we are going to talk about today. So when I give this to audiences like at schools in San Diego, I don't put this next slide in. Okay, so here's a probability density function of, let's say that we're just having random behavior of different people, and sometimes you meet a bad guy, sometimes you meet a good guy, and they treat you well or badly, depending, willy-nilly. Maybe it's a random walk. I actually have no idea what this distribution would look like. It's probably a power law. Am I right? Power law. So probably the most common thing that we experience is right here, right in the middle, right? That things are just kind of going about, and like you can't assign a value to it or not. It's not good or bad. And if we're talking about women's experiences in STEM fields, probably they look a little bit different than men's experiences in STEM fields, right? Because of discrimination and all sorts of things. So now imagine that, like the tip of the iceberg, there's some of it that you can't see, right? So we have a good pipeline of girls going into the field. It's super awesome. People love Antarctica, right? I rarely meet a person who doesn't really want to go to Antarctica, right? So it's not that it's inherently boring to go and explore Antarctica. But the problem is that I think that a lot of times when we meet the people around us, and the people around us talk about their experiences, which for one thing, doesn't happen very often, right? Where people actually say, hey, I was sexually harassed when I was a student. That rarely comes up in polite conversation, right? It's very, very awkward. Trust me. It is an awkward topic. So what happens, though, is that you perhaps are truncating this distribution. So even if you do talk about things, which doesn't happen very often, you're truncating this distribution. And so perhaps there's a whole bunch, all that stuff under the iceberg is stuff that you don't hear about because those people leave. So there are a couple of people out there. You'll notice that there are some senior women around, and maybe those people are down here in that little orange bar, right? So those people somehow managed, if we think about this as a population dynamics problem, year after year after year, they have survived, right? And so if we think about surviving or having strategies to deal with harassment, and I actually got this from Law and Order SVU, great show. So some of these ways that people deal with these real struggles is fight, flee, freeze, force. I added those last two because I think they're important for our discussion today. And so when we think about these, we think about what kinds of stories are we hearing from the women who are still here? Well, some of them are on that good times side, right? I doubt there's a lot of senior women who would say that they've been on that side exclusively throughout their careers, right? And then there's some who are in that problematic treatment side, right? And so they have employed these different strategies over time, like fight, flee, freeze, and force. And I kind of liken them, and I have a GSA blog post that talks about this a lot. If you Google my name and elephant, I think that's the only thing that comes up, but I'm not totally sure. So if we think about this in terms of like strategies that animals use in the animal kingdom to fight this sort of thing, you have tigers, right? You have tigers who, when they were sexually harassed, they actually fought back. They reported things, right? And some of those tigers won. And what winning means is that they got a decision that someone, yes, did sexually harass them, and then nothing happened, right? Except for the person who sexually harassed them probably tells their colleagues not to ever work with that person. That's winning, right? And then sometimes they lose. So it was just two people in a broom closet, right? And the student says, yes, this happened. The faculty member with more power said, no, it didn't. And the Title IX office maybe believes that person. So they fought, they were a tiger, and they lost too. So now we have two tigers out, right? So they're not in this distribution, unless you actively seek them out to talk to them. Then you have the gazelle. They left the field, they're gone. So we can't talk to them anymore. We don't hear their stories of why they left the field. Then we have forces, and at Scripps we have a bunch of those. Those senior women who are just like so into what they're doing that they're like an elephant charging through the forest. They see a tree or sexual harassment and they just mow it down. Sometimes they don't even notice it, right? Because they're so singularly focused on that goal of something in science. Then we have the people who kind of freeze, play dead, and wait until the danger has passed, and then they go about their business. And I can tell you a lot about how possums live their lives. The anxious anxiety of the possum. That was me. So this is also me. So I don't know why it is that I'm on this side of this distribution. I actually don't. If anyone knows or sees something in my affect about why I get sexually harassed a lot, please tell me what it is and I will change it instantly. But if I were to just guess before I started in science, if I was likely to be someone who was discriminated against or sexually harassed, I'd say not a chance. I was one of those kids or those people in college who I heard that there was a women in science group, and I was like, why would you need that? I'm a scientist. I don't need to be a woman scientist. I was a black belt in Taekwondo. I'm super tough. I really don't know what it is about me. So nowadays, I think that it is truly a random distribution of things that you might experience. And so I just happen to be in this part of it. So one of those things that I experienced was extreme sexual harassment in Antarctica. And you might know my name from this science article, which for students out there, this is not how you want to get into science, by the way. Just kidding. So it came out the day after the Harvey Weinstein story broke, and it was a big splash. It was even on Samantha Bee. She said, we tried to go somewhere in the world where women did not get sexually harassed. And I Googled it, and here it was. And she talked all about the case, even on primetime TV, or late night TV, let's be honest, okay? So my experience in Antarctica was truly, I thought I was one of the 0.00001% of scientists, female scientists, who went through the horrible treatment that I experienced there. And some of those things included this is going to have some salty language in it, by the way. So sorry about that in advance. Easier to hear it now than live it. But I would be called a slut and a whore on a daily basis. He would try to make me cry every day. I would try to pee into a bottle, right? Which is a hard thing to do for a woman in the field sometimes. And he would throw rocks at me, push me down on numerous occasions, push me down a mountain, blew ash in my eyes. And on one particular day, and I was super excited because we found some ash in a moraine, and that would tell us how old it was. without having to invoke cosmogenic nuclides, my bread and butter. I was really, really excited because that would be a great thing to have in my master's thesis. So I should add that this is 1999 to 2001 that I was working with Dave Marchant at BU. And so he blew ash in my eyes. I was trying to use a hand lens in order to see the sanity crystals. And he blew it in my eyes. And I already had UV blindness. And so it was incredibly painful. And then the next day, as if that wasn't enough, here, I don't know if you can see that, but it says Jane's Ash on the back of my BFC coat there. So he was trying to write something else, and I added an H. So that's not all, though. That would be enough for me, but that's not all. So I also, when I was interviewing for my first faculty position that I took, a place where they, just this year, in their 150-year history, tenured a woman. Good record there. Someone commented that he could, the previous woman who gave a talk, he could see her nipples, and that he could not see mine, trying to rattle me before the interview. And then someone slammed their fists down on the table and said, "That is so inappropriate." And then another faculty member said, "That's what tenure is for, ha 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 ha." Right? So this is a place with a super bad culture, right? When that kind of thing is both public and a shared opinion among the two senior faculty members. At that same department, I was denied maternity leave. I was told that my teaching was 0.5 points below the men in the department, and so they wanted me to bone up on my teaching and have more opportunities to teach. So I taught 4 days after giving birth. Most recently, it just keeps coming, I know. And you'll note that I actually don't put myself over here, right, at the very tip of things that can happen in academia that I know of. So an individual, after I reported the sexual harassment that I'd had during my master's degree, there's an entire poster at AGU about how I was unethical. My picture was on it many times. And the story that referenced me, which had my name in it, which I allowed to have my name, entire poster, GSA employee. And then, when I went to GSA this year, I reported it, of course, to GSA and AGU. This year, the same guy was following women that reported him and me around with a GoPro camera, right? So those are just the highlights. Oh, and then last spring, after it came down that Dave Marchant was fired from BU, I don't know if you can read that. It's DIECUNT. That was written on my door at Scripps. So there's a whole bunch of mailed death threats to me as well. So I don't put myself, you'll notice, at that part of the curve. People, after the science article came out, told me some horrible, horrible things. And I actually don't like talking to you guys about this. And I just feel like it's sort of my obligation as one of those people in that part of the curve so that you hear what it's like for some of us. I also often don't cry during this, but if I do, it's going to be during the next one. So, when is this going to change? So, the World Economic Forum said that gender parity, so when women are making the same amount, when women are populating high-level positions at the same point, same rights as men, is not going to happen until globally 200 years from now, if you sort of willy-nilly extrapolate out. It's a little bit better for the United States, about 100 years. In my old department, before I came to Scripps, it's kind of a weird thing because I was talking to some women, or a woman, the only other woman who was there before me, and she said, it's super weird because the only people that were there at the same time that I was there and you were there, like, there's just one guy who rarely comes into work, right? And so how could the department culture persist after you keep hiring new people? Don't new people bring fresh ideas and less gender discrimination, racial discrimination, and harassment? And I'm here to say that it doesn't. Hiring new people, if they're just going to be trained into a culture that's toxic, is not going to be the answer. So the reason I eventually, almost 2 decades later, filed a Title IX complaint against my previous supervisor from when I did my master's degree in Antarctica, is that this little girl, she's a little bit older now, we were in the lab on a weekend. She saw me in my lab coat, and I had told her I was a scientist before, but it hadn't truly registered with her, And so she saw me in my booties and I'm in my clean lab getup with the gloves and the goggles and stuff like that. And she looked at me and she's like, "Mommy, I want to be a scientist too." And I just sort of, it triggered me. We hear that word all the time, but it definitely triggered me at that point. And I thought of my important little girl, and you can think about yourself, you can think about your spouse, you can think about your students. I don't care who you think about. I think about my daughter and how this important little girl could be treated like trash in 20 years. So I'm here to tell you that can't happen. Okay, so I made it through without crying in that slide. That's always the tough one, seeing my daughter. Oh my gosh, tugs at my heartstrings. Okay, so why don't women report? Why didn't I report for 20 years almost? So in my case, I would have definitely experienced negative effects of reporting, especially with Marchant, I have to say. Very vindictive. And I didn't want to be just the troublemaker or the girl who reported harassment, right? You get labeled. Hopefully that starts to change a little bit. And I thought about all these different things. All these things. And I was annoyed. I would alternate between being annoyed and being sad. Sad, annoyed, annoyed. And then I think about not doing anything. And then I feel guilty, right? And then I'd feel annoyed because he was the one that should be blamed, right? I shouldn't be made to feel guilty for his actions. And then I just took it, the whole experience, wrapped it up in a little package and put it in my mental attic. And I said, well, someday I'm going to do something about that, right? And I heard from so many people who just, they don't want to bother with it, right? So they called me after the science article came out, or emailed me, and I said, have you ever thought about, reporting? And they're like, nothing's going to happen. I don't want to take the energy. I got pushed out of science. Why should I make it better for others? Kind of an understandable perspective. The other thing that happens is that sometimes things truly don't happen after someone reports something. So that's a real problematic thing. And so one time, sometimes I would talk to other people, and there was kind of this open secret. I know a lot of you didn't know, but there are a lot of people who did. And I forget if it was, I was giving a talk at one of those fancy universities in Boston. I forget if it was Harvard or MIT, honestly. It was a fancy one. And I was talking to a guy who was super smart. And he said, he was a senior man in the field, and he's like, oh, that guy, he's a psycho. And that's something that I remember people saying to me over and over and over, like, that guy's a psycho. So people knew that things that were problematic were really happening, and a lot of people didn't do anything about it. they would say things like, oh, well, it was none of my business. And it's true, like it would have been really hard for someone if they'd heard something to say something, especially because of the sort of weird incentive structures, the perverse, honestly, incentive structures set up around reporting sexual harassment in academia. I thought it might make it worse, which is totally true if they reported something without the person's knowledge. Sometimes you hear things like, oh, boys will be boys. Sometimes people will just say like, well, none of my business, I'm super busy, I didn't know what to do, that sort of thing. So what can we do? So people know, now you know, right, that this stuff is happening, and it's not just me. That's the other thing that happened when when the science article came out. A lot of people started saying, you know, hashtag me too, right? A lot of people, a lot of women were sexually harassed and were starting to talk about it. So what can you do? So you can target audiences that include people with power. So a lot of times people will give talks at universities and there'll be a room full of women. So that's why I'm so jazzed to see all of you men here too. Because often this is something that's seen as something that women are talking to each other about. Like we have whisper networks, right? Don't work with that guy. He sexually harasses. And sometimes men never hear about these whispers, right? So I think we have to start speaking louder. A whisper network is good. A shouting network is what I'm hoping you'll all become after leaving here. So tell senior men and women about these things so that they can help. Department chairs, deans, about kind of things that are going on that you're hearing. Sometimes it doesn't help, but sometimes it does. Council members, presidents, get them to make a code of conduct and make it stick, right? Have teeth. And just as an example, when I filed my Title IX complaint at BU, there was this long investigation. It took about a year just for anything to happen. And during that time, I noticed that Marchant was on the editorial board. He was an AE for GSA Bulletin. And so I decided to take it upon myself to send the complaint to GSA. And later, so months later, after sending the complaint of his problematic behavior, that include witness testimonies, that include letters from people I'd never met, who I tracked down and said the exact same thing happened to them. So it was like a packet of material. One woman who worked with him in Antarctica after, when they were both graduate students, had this clipping of like, women don't belong in the Arctic. She still had it. And it was signed by him. He put it on her bulletin board. Anyway, so later on, I see, he became a fellow of the Geological Society of America. And for some reason, just the idea that my home in sort of society would honor someone after knowing that about them just sat really wrong with me. And so I started to send the complaint and all of the documenting material to every senior woman I knew. Helen, you got one. And some of them were in the National Academy. A bunch of them were fellows themselves. Some of them had medals. And so they, without even kind of telling me about it, they decided, a group of them, these senior women, that they were going to, if nothing was done about this, and if he wasn't removed from the list of fellows, they were going to quite publicly on Twitter say that they were not going to be members of the Geological Society of America anymore. And lo and behold, then in November 2017, his name's not there anymore. So that's an example of, even though I was just a lowly associate professor at Scripps, I had a bunch of friends who were incredibly powerful in that organization, and they helped create change. And now they have a new rule at GSA that I call the Marchant rule. So how can we help more in addition to pushing powerful people to do things on our behalf to make change. So becoming allies and advocates. So how is it that so little was done for so long, right? It's because that a lot of people did nothing. Like actually did nothing. Would hear about problematic behavior and did nothing. Zero, right? And so think of all the discoveries that truncated distribution could have made, right? We've been working with only half steam for decades, right? Losing all those amazing minds. And I have to say that a lot of times I get the comment, well, if you're at that part of the distribution, it actually probably makes you stronger, right? I think that I would like a greeting card that says, I will never say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. It doesn't carry over. So case in point, even though I'm very tough, and I did stick with academia, even though I had a whole bunch of experiences that were very negative, I got a revise and resubmit from Nature in 2012. And the reviews made me feel bad, so I never resubmitted it. I'm not the most resilient person. That was just an example of how I am not resilient in all respects. So it did not make me a stronger person. It actually damaged me more, I think. And I would have liked to have found out what I would have been without all that harassment. So what can you do being an ally and an advocate? If you're in a group, someone makes a stupid comment, and we're going to play bystander bingo in a little bit to do some sort of active engagement. If you're in a group, someone makes a sexist comment, I disagree, right? There's all kinds of strategies that you can take to deflect the direction of the conversation to a different conversation, right? People do this with small children all the time. Someone's tugging their sister's hair or something like that. It's like, look, away he goes, right? It's super effective. Just a little parenting tip there. Sometimes this small phrase can really go a long way, partly because this small phrase signals that you're a safe person, and that if a student or a trainee or an assistant professor or whatever is experiencing something negative, that they can actually go to you and feel like you're going to be someone on their side, right? You can arrange for bystander training at your university. I'm sure a lot of you are not sexual harassers. Probably 100% of you are not sexual harassers, right? So today we're going to do some learning about what kinds of things, even if you're not a sexual harasser, which is maybe 0.01% of the population, you can still do something, because we can't do nothing, right? So we're gonna arrange for bystander training at your university. If someone comes to you with a problem, or a student tells you about problematic behavior, this is really important. Just listen to their story. Don't press them for details or what happened next or why were you in that room or anything like that. Trust me, there will be layers and layers of people that will ask those kinds of questions. So listen respectfully. Even if the person accused is your friend, I was telling someone about some behavior that a student told me about, and someone was like, but they're my colleague. Isn't everyone someone's colleague, right? You aren't immune to sexually harassing someone just because you're someone's colleague. Everybody is someone's colleague. So just because you can't imagine that it would happen doesn't mean that it necessarily did. And people don't often, well, I'll get to this later, but people don't often sexually harass every single person that they come in contact with. That would make it super easy, right? You could just have a GoPro camera on your shoulder like that guy at GSA. So make opportunities to listen to people who might have been harassed. That's really important too. So things like blind evaluations are really good. Exit interviews for women leaving the field. Those never happened. I left my university. I would have liked to have told them about things that they could change for the better for the new people that were coming in and the women that were hired after I was. But that didn't happen. It almost never happens. When hiring senior people, require that you get reference letters from all of their trainees. All the ones that left, if there's a record of them, get a letter from them. The University of California, San Diego, I'm very proud of them for this. They're actually doing an institutional background check to see if there has been any problematic behavior at other universities before giving someone tenure, which I think is awesome. I adopted a group discussion series called Growing Up in Science at Scripps, where we talk to one faculty member at a time, once per month, and they talk about their story. And so that becomes a really nice avenue for you to get to talk to another person as a human being. You can hear about the things that they struggled with, and it becomes a little bit easier for trainees who are experiencing something really bad to know that you have that. There's a phrase, be who you needed when you were younger, right? Who did you need when you were younger? And are you being that person for someone else? You can also just send out a message to all the graduate students that says, need help? Please talk to me. I will try to help you. I will be your advocate. So university administrators are part of the problem, honestly. What we need instead of the Title IX office, which can be good but can be super bad, is I like to refer to it as an office of good advice. And this could be a diversity and inclusion office, a counseling center, somewhere where people can actually talk anonymously about their experiences. A lot of times people are mandatory reporters if they're faculty at public institutions, and so it doesn't always work to say, you can come talk to me and it'll be anonymous, because if you're a reporter, you have to tell someone about it. And they should be separate from the Title IX office. The Title IX office is sort of bad because someone in the Office of Good Advice, that doesn't exist, by the way, we need to make that office, needs to keep track of the names of people, right? So a lot of times it's done unofficially through ombuds. People who are ombuds for 10 years or something like that can keep a tally of who comes and complains to them about different faculty, or which faculty are complained about. But the university has sort of a fluid population, and Title IX offices have fluid populations too, right? And so one of the ways that harassers can continue harassing is by specifically, and this was true for my harasser, Marshawn, one individual at a time, right? Perhaps if it's in a classroom setting, in different classes, so that they never meet each other or know about each other. Sometimes they're going to be years apart, and sort of methodically so, right? They'll pick one person, wait a little bit till they leave, pick another person. The targets might not meet each other and might not even know about each other. And this is why a second report is so important, and that office needs to have lots of people keeping track of who does what. And so this is a case from Cosby, so it's instead of a he said, she said, it was a he said, she said, she said, she said, which is super hard to say in public, by the way. Don't ever put that on a slide ever again, Jane. So a lot of people that decide, like, well, it's her word against his, and we'll never know what happened. Well, usually there are many, many people. So people who do this once will often do it many, many times. And just as an example, in my surface process community, 20 women told me about the same guy. And I asked them all, would you like to know about other people who experience the same harassment? And they're just like, well, no, I don't really want to know. I doubt that there are other people. And I can't, I say things like, well, I'm not going to betray their trust, right? But there are these people who have said the same thing about one guy. Postdoc had a baby. One guy. So if you have a buddy and filing a complaint, if you know about other people and have a network of people who will all talk about these things, it's easier to go through all of the processes. So currently, sexual harassment reports in university settings are filed under the name of the person doing the complaining, right? So there's a Willenbring file. There was never a Marchant file. There's also this, Deborah Doe in the science article. There's a file for her, right? There needs to be a Marchant file with multiple people's complaints in that one file. It's a super easy thing to do. You might check with your universities to see how they file their sexual harassment complaints. Under Title IX, they're totally able to just file them under the name of the person who is the sexual harasser. There's this thing called Project Callisto, which is an information escrow, it's called. So you can put in information about who you're reporting, and the only time it actually gets flagged or you hear about it again is if someone else reports something about that very same person. So that's super useful. So federal agencies and universities. So does your university have a code of conduct? Mine doesn't. And it's we have a principles of conduct, which is sort of like a really good idea with no teeth, right? So it's like, well, if you want, you could not harass people. That would be great. Thanks. So the problem with Title IX and why you need a mechanism outside of Title IX is that there's, for the federal Title IX office for sexual harassment, you actually need, it has to be done 180 days prior or sooner. So there's a lot of cases where people don't necessarily want to report within 180 days. They're trying to get a thesis through their committee, all kinds of things like that. There's not many cases where 180 days covers it, right? So because Boston University had a code of conduct that Marchant violated, I was able to file and have it be investigated. And one of the really great things that happened as a result of this Marchant investigation is that the Science, Space, and Technology Committee in Congress opened a bipartisan investigation. And it's, I think, maybe the only time Lamar Smith and Representative Johnson have ever worked together on something, maybe. They're super different ends of the political spectrum, but they came together on this. And it was to ask the question, how is it that this person has been harassing women for decades and getting all kinds of federal monies, millions of dollars of federal money? And it turns out that no one knew about it, right? Both because Title IX complaints are not public matters, right? And so NSF and NASA would have to read about it in Science. And then they made this wonderful, and I have to congratulate and thank from the bottom of my heart NSF for making these important changes to say that new funding would only go to people who had not had a credible complaint of sexual harassment or discrimination and all kinds of other things in their name, or they don't get to have more new funding, right? And so this is wonderful, and I cheered literally out loud. I don't know the Twitter acronym for that. LOC? I don't know. Anyway, so I cheered out loud when I heard the news. But the problem is for Antarctica, this is something that is really problematic for our specific phase space, is that Antarctica has specific problems that are unique and not able to be well handled by Title IX offices. And so some of these, which were summarized by Brad Rosenheim and Amelia Chevenel in from University of South Florida, there's a petition that went out a couple of years ago, and then a letter that was sent to NSF to specifically talk about why the Title IX procedure and having universities tell NSF about the sexual harassment or discrimination that's happening is not sufficient, right? And so one thing that happens in Antarctica is field camps are composed of investigators from lots and lots of different universities. And so a lot of times, a Title IX office really does not want to investigate anything at all. So there are some exceptions to that rule, but most of the time, they don't want to investigate. They want to kind of sweep it under the rug and not deal. And so if someone is from a different university, like not an actual student of that university, they'll just say, oh, this isn't in our purview. You're not a student of ours. Why don't you report it to your own university? And their own university will say, well, that's not a faculty member of ours. And so you're in this limbo land where you can't really get any action because the person was someone at a different universities. Universities also develop code of conduct or codes of conduct specifically for young students living in dorms and on campuses, right? They're super safe environments. And so how would you expect a code of conduct to cover like the tiny, tiny little percentage of people who actually go to Antarctica, right? And experience things that you might not expect. Like you can't just always report from Antarctica immediately. You just can't. Sometimes your sat phone doesn't work, or HF radio in my case. So they shouldn't be expected to develop those policies. Let's see. So what can NSF do and other funding agencies? And this is not anything that NSF has not heard today, just so I'm not surprising them. Heard before today. So NSF can remove this responsibility from individual university investigatory units, so like Title IX, for example, or Title VII if it's racially related. It has to have its own investigatory office, and I realize that's lots of new people to hire, but it's really what the community needs, because you're never going to have a better academic STEM culture if people can't be called out and punished for actually doing things wrong, harassing people, discriminating against people because of race, gender, all kinds of things. Need to outline clear procedures and jurisdiction for reporting and what will happen if something happens. I know that there are some of these procedures that are already in place. I've heard that sometimes they get glossed over, for example, when people are first going into the field. And then there's also a big problem, I think, which I fortunately don't have to deal with, but a lot of people who have actually filed Title IX complaints against supervisors and coworkers and colleagues, they're retaliated against. So it's some crazy number that ranges from 85% to even sometimes people have found over 95% of workplace harassment or discrimination. Those people who report experience retaliation. So the chances of you being retaliated against are almost certain, right? 95% of people get retaliated against. So if those people are reviewing your proposals, reviewing your papers, you need to deal with that so that people have more freedom to do things like report. And these are all things that you can do that are hard, but a lot of people, or one thing that was very surprising to me after the science article came out, is that I got a flood of emails and calls, like I told you, from people who were harassed before. But a bunch of them were from men. And I have to tell you, my immediate sort of visceral response was not of empathy. After a lifetime of put-downs and come-ons. But then I thought about it, and I thought, well, the worst thing to me in experiencing the sexual harassment during my master's was that he said, you'll never work in science. if you report this. And so men experience that kind of power differential as well, even though there's no gendered component to it or sexual component to the harassment they experience. And so I think that all the policies that we put into place from now on, even if we can't change Title IX, they have to be for harassment. And then sexual harassment can be a subset of that. And bullying behavior needs to be covered outside of sexual harassment. And I was really inspired by this story that I heard on Ruth Bader Ginsburg, RBG, back when she was an ACLU lawyer. So she took to the Supreme Court, the 14th Amendment was passed in 1868, right? But we actually did not have a free and equal society after 1868. And so she came to the Supreme Court to argue a case on gender discrimination. And she actually did a different case, and then she was asked about the gender discrimination case. Whatever, details. You can listen to the Radio Lab episode yourself. So, for nearly a century, women didn't have the same equal rights under the law, really, right? Even if they truly should have. And so she took a case before the Supreme Court where men were the victims of the discrimination. And so, in doing so, she had this all-male Supreme Court, right? And they thought, well, I don't want to be discriminated against, right? It shouldn't have taken that. But I thought it was so super impressive that she thought to be that sneaky. And one of the quotes in a book about her was, people who want to keep women down would like nothing better than for women to go off in a corner and speak only to women. Nothing would happen. That's what's been happening. Women are speaking to women about this, but not anymore, right? That's the really wonderful thing about the Me Too movement. You need to persuade men that this is right for society. So we've been doing this on our own, and not all women have actually been working toward this either. Sometimes women are the worst harassers out there. And writing science of harassment of everybody is right for science too. So I just want to end this speaking at you portion of today by ending with this wonderful quote by Jen Huemstra, who, if you're on Twitter, you should totally follow her because she's great. But academic culture is the sum of all our words, actions, and beliefs. It can feel intimidating to talk about how we change the culture. But we do that with everything we say, do, and think. Progress may feel slow at times, but it's real. And so from now on, we're going to play a little bit of a game called Bystander Bingo that I have the migraine mavens to thank for. And you might think that some of these situations that I'm going to give you are sort of small potatoes compared to being pushed down on the ground in Antarctica and spit on. Granted. However, sometimes you have to think, I always think of the quote that a ton of feathers is still a ton, right? So you can experience like a ton of one big, terrible, horrible thing that happens to you, or a bunch of lots of little tiny things that happen over the course of your lifetime. And the effect can be the same. A ton of feathers or a truck dropping on you at the time. Okay, so I would like you to grab a bystander bingo card and get together with a buddy, so someone that you're sitting next to. And first we're going to play bystander bingo. You have to get 5 in a row.
Right, can we hurry it up?
So everyone
Thanks,
have
Kaya.
a card.
How do we play this game?
I don't know. She's going to teach
Going
us.
around. So you might want to study your sheet. Go fast, all right? Okay. All right. Hopefully everybody has pens and pencils and writing utensils. Okay, so this is going to be super hard because you're going to want to put, excuse me, what did you say for each one? I'm going to tell you to try not to do that. because you might have to save that for the next one, right? You can also, for each little scenario that I have, you can only do one appropriate square. So there's some that are similar bystander interventions. So if you put 2 for one question, it doesn't count. And I'm keeping track. So what you might want to do is mark like, oh, this could be good for this one, and this could be good for this one. And so you can mark like 1, 1, and then decide later on which line you want to draw, right? I shouldn't have told you that. It's all about the strategy. Okay, so now we're going to go through some experiences that are real. So I took real experiences, how the person behaved, and I'm going to give you this scenario. And then I would like shouts from the audience with raising hands. Of course, we're not monsters. And I will call on you, and you can say, why is that problematic? Because it might not be clear to everybody in the room, and you might have a different idea about why it's problematic than I do. Okay, here's the first one. And then we're also going to talk about what they should have said instead. So, this happens in Antarctica all the time, I bet. Your colleague meets your new student in the field for the first time and says, I know I'm not supposed to say this, but I've never seen anyone look so good in field gear. All right. As a bystander, what would you say or do to your colleague? No violence. Never any violence. And so sometimes you'll note that on the bystander bingo card, there's one over here that says, it's so hard to see this, but on this part of your card, you might say, point it out privately to the speaker when you get a chance. This is a very common form of unconscious bias. So that's a strategy that you can use so that it doesn't dominate the entire conversation. If you have a problematic person in a faculty meeting, for example, you don't want to call them out on every single thing that they say about women, even though it might feel good. So sometimes not saying anything in that moment and not embarrassing the person is a very strategic move and will actually have a better long-term goal output than calling them out and embarrassing them right there. Yeah. All right. Oh, I see a hand raised. Do you have an idea for why that's problematic?
Yeah.
Or do you have a question?
I also want to say I have a microphone, so
great.
if anyone wants to say something, I'll bring the microphone to you. But yeah, we basically the idea is that you don't want to, in a professional setting, comment on other people's appearance.
When is a good time? This is a good question. When is a time good time in a professional setting to comment on a woman's appearance?
Never.
Never is the correct answer to that. Exactly. Unless you are also a girl and she's wearing cute shoes, then all bets are off. So that is absolutely correct. Does anyone have any other comments about that? Additions to that? Yeah.
Yeah, it seems problematic that the person acknowledges that they're not supposed to say it, but they say it anyways.
Yeah. So, are you, what kind of sociopath are you? So, yeah, I totally agree. So why it's bad. So women are used to being judged for their appearances all the time, right? And so it goes from being, kind of put off guard. You probably are not a good person to work with, so it's bad for you to say that kind of thing. And then it's also it also demeans their sort of actual abilities and talents, right? If you're always talking about how they look and, how you, even if you think that it's something that, a compliment that you would like to get, right? So at my daughter's school, they actually use this thing called the platinum rule, which I've never heard of before. Has anyone heard of the platinum rule? So the golden rule is do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right? So the platinum rule is even better. The platinum rule is do unto others as they want done to them, right? So just because you want a woman to say, you're looking good, right? I was pointing to no one, I was pointing to that door. It's a professional setting. Even though you might want that, you can't tell if other people really want that. And I'm with you. I don't know how people ever become couples in a professional setting. But maybe that's something that we could talk about too, the appropriateness of people becoming couples in a professional setting. So what they should have said, nothing. Nothing is always a good thing to say about work colleagues' appearance. Okay, next bingo. Did you guys all mark one or two that would be appropriate for that? And in case you've never played bingo before,
Which one are we putting down? That one?
That one?
you need to get 5 in a row.
That one? It's a good
And
one.
then you,
Yeah.
Or that one.
I like the mentioning at the time.
Yeah.
You didn't know that it was
That's how it goes.
like you didn't.
I agree.
Oh, we don't know.
Okay, are we ready for the next one? I'm on a time schedule here. Okay, so a female colleague, are we ready? A female colleague discloses to you and your colleague, so you're a couple of friends sitting around, that she went to a bar to talk about her new model with a male senior scientist, and he touched her leg under the table. At which point she promptly left the bar, and then she was really distraught, and she came to you, and your colleague next to you says, you're wearing heels and meeting a guy in a bar at a conference. What do you think he wanted to talk to you about? So in that moment, what would you say to this poor girl?
To the girl or to the college?
Or, so either one. You're a bystander to both
Alright.
those things happening, right?
Yeah.
The girl is dealing with some
Yes.
stuff, and the guy just said something clearly inappropriate at the worst possible time. So does anyone have an idea why this is problematic? Some of these are harder than others. Maybe it's too easy, no hands raised. It's too easy, but it's actually the opposite of the last one. So some women, especially junior trainees, are not used to being judged on their appearance. So it can cut both ways. Either you are judged on your appearance all the time, or like it hadn't occurred to you that someone would actually do that. That was where I was when I started my master's degree. I had no idea that, like, I'd always been by my undergrad supervisor, wonderful man Alan Ashworth. He'd always treated me as an equal as much as possible for an undergrad. And it never occurred to me that someone would comment on my physicality as a student. And so when someone does that, it is telling them that obviously you weren't good enough as a scientist for this senior person to want to talk to you. You're only good because you're wearing heels and are a sexual object, right? It's also super problematic because it blames the victim for, again, what should you wear, or what should you say about someone and what they're wearing? Nothing, yes. Yay. Okay, what they should have said, I'm sorry he did that, right? It's not okay and it should not have happened. What do we do now? Okay. Do you all have your marks? Okay, that was kind of an easy one. Okay. So you're working with another colleague to organize and select speakers for a conference workshop. Your female colleague says, just to mix it up a bit, we have to be careful not to invite less qualified women just to have enough female speakers. That's not fair to the men. There are actually women out there who would say that. I know them. So why is that problematic? It does make a hell of an assumption. So, in front here, he said it makes an assumption. So the assumption underlying the statement is there are not enough qualified women available to speak on the topic, right? And then kind of a corollary to it. So that's rarely true, right? It's probably have to be a super niche topic for that not to be women if you really tried hard. This is also problematic because if you are selecting speakers who you know that they give good talks, right? So this is something that's said a lot too, like, oh, I don't know if she gives a good talk. I know this guy is a really incredible speaker. It just perpetuates the lack of female speakers, right? If you don't hear them ever, then you'll never know that they're a good speaker. And so this is a self-perpetuating problem. So what they should have said is perhaps something like, now this isn't what the bystander should say, it's what the person should have said instead. Let's make sure we aren't overlooking anyone, right? Our panel should include experts from various backgrounds. Maybe we should give a spot to a speaker we haven't heard from before in order to give them a chance. So I'm really happy to see the gender breakdown of this meeting, for example. Okay, we all have our marks?
Which one are we marking?
Yes.
Then
we're like,
Oh, I'm going for it.
oh, right. Because we want to get bingo. We want to win.
Yeah, we want to win. You're right. Even though I think that's a little too cautious of a response.
What's the other?
Well, that one.
Yeah, this one's a good one.
Oh. That's good.
Okay,
The
are you all set? You have them?
Man.
What is it?
All right, it's not cheating
It's a
just to
panel of
put a
only
little
men.
mark, see where you need to go. Anyway, okay. You're standing next to a senior scientist at a conference. A new female colleague from your academic institution introduces herself to the small group and says she's a new professor. The senior scientist says, "You're way too young to be a professor." What do you say?
Retire.
So, this one, I feel like I hear it all the time, right? Less and less so these days. Whatever. Such as my 40s. So why is this one problematic? Doesn't everyone like being told that they look young? Yes, so Shane said they don't like to be told they're unqualified. So young means junior, usually, right? And so junior means inexperienced, young means unqualified. So there are all kinds of things that someone can take from this. Again, the platinum rule. You might want someone to tell you that you look young. The other person might not want to learn that other people think that they look too young for the job, right? And it's not like you're saying something new to them either, right? People that look young hear it over and over and over and over. It's one of those ton of feathers sort of things. So why it's bad, saying that they look too young implies that she is lacking in authority, even if it's meant to be a compliment. What they should have said
That's not
instead,
strategically good.
congrats on the new position.
That one's a little.
This is
little
not
better
a tough
strategy.
one to navigate, people.
Starting the diagonal.
Lots of things that you could say. What's
Big
your
thing.
area of expertise? You're meeting them for the first time. You don't have to say something about their physicality. All right. Was that an easy one? Yeah.
Is there a reason why he's always saying that a woman? Because 3 of the cases that you've shown here, they're like the men.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. Thank you so much for bringing that up. So I was just called out, and rightly so, for having saying that a woman looks too young instead of saying like a man looks too young. Totally. I got these the scenarios from the reason that it's like that, and it's totally my laziness, and I will fix it post haste. Which, by the way, if anyone wants bystander bingo to take back to your institutions, I will send it to you as a PDF or whatever. if you'd like it, and I can send it as a Word file so you can change problematic wording that I have. There was a great paper. It's like 11 things women wish men wouldn't say to them. So that's why they're all like focused around women. But you could have an alternative bystander bingo that includes race more. I would love to get feedback on a better bystander bingo. Okay.
One comment on that actually.
Yeah.
Hi. So we actually did that in undergrad, and there was a lot like the bystander intervention training, and all the names they used were gender neutral names like Taylor. So you could interpret it the way you wanted to.
Oh, I love that. That's
really
awesome.
useful.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. Okay, next one. A collaborator who is supposed to lead your team's remote fieldwork is pregnant. This one, I'm pretty, well, no, could be a trans person, I guess. So one of the co-PIs says, "What were you thinking? I hope you don't expect us to cover for you when you're on maternity leave. How would you feel if I decided to go on vacation for 3 months when we planned to go to the field?" I know for a fact this has happened.
Yeah, we're doing well on that right side.
Yeah.
So why would this be problematic?
It's not a vacation.
Not a vacation. Exactly. On for the win. So maternity leave is not a vacation. Women have a legal right to maternity leave in the same way that others have a legal right to take leave for important family or medical matters. If you had to have surgery for something, you would hope and expect that your colleagues would pick up the slack, right, and help you out. And also, people say, well, if you have surgery, it's not as planned as pregnancy. So I'm here to tell you that a lot of people have trouble getting pregnant, and the last thing on their mind is timing it for the Antarctic field season. And it can bring up very, very painful memories, too, of unsuccessful pregnancies, too. What they should have said is, let me know if there's anything that I can do to accommodate you while you are pregnant. We're here to support you. How would isn't that such a clear distinction between terrible thing to say and great thing to say? Okay, that was maybe an easy one. Okay, you're standing next to a senior scientist at a conference poster session, and a postdoc comes over to introduce herself. The senior scientist shakes her hand, but refuses to let go as he looks deeply into her eyes. He says, insert academic institution X, always gets the most beautiful postdocs. His face implies that this is a sexual comment. This is a real scenario. I know that this is kind of an obvious one. But it's kind of hard to figure out what to do in the moment sometimes. Yeah. Right? It takes a lot of bravery, actually, to hear something like that and to actually say something about it. I've been in many situations where something equal to this happened and nobody said a thing, right? So let's not do that. So this is a kind of an easy one, right? For why it's bad.
I think the center.
You're all like,
Yeah.
Just like,
especially.
the fuck are you
So why it's bad, flirtatious sexually suggestive behavior is inappropriate in a professional setting. It's also particularly troubling. I wanted to point out one extra thing, is that it's problematic too because it's a senior person and a junior trainee. And so there's a power differential there, right? And so, you might want to expect that the trainee would just, pull her hand back and slap the guy and say, "You creep." Why don't women do that, right? Because they are in positions of power and they could feel jilted and take it out on them the rest of their career. And this is something that happens too. What they should have said, "Nice to meet you." Nice and easy. I can't believe there's no bingo yet. Okay. Do you have bingo? I think I'm going to have one more. So is it okay You're the winner, I guess. You get something. You guys get something. I'm gonna figure out what. So, your female colleague, this is the last one, tells you and a male colleague that she's been selected for a leadership role at AGU.
We're so close.
The male colleague says, "Are you sure you can do this? You have 2 small children. You don't have time for this."
I would say.
Yes.
Yes, they do.
Men definitely have children. That's kind of bystander regulations. Okay, why is this bad? So there's an assumption there, right? I mean, this is kind of a thing that we do in our society. We pat men on the back for sometimes doing only minimal amount of parenting, and we think that it is a burden for women, right? And in fact, it is a burden for everybody. It's a joy and a burden. Yeah, so why it's bad, obviously, is this makes her feel like she's less than capable, right? I hear this one all the time at seminars. Instead of someone saying, like, I don't need to walk you through this, someone will say something like, this is so easy, even your mother can understand. I did not go down 30 points in my IQ because I had a child. If anything, I became smart. So this is telling her that she is not capable of making decisions about her work-life balance, right? That's not okay. And you should be rallying your support for her for taking on one of these leadership roles, if only that then you don't have to do it, right? So people also rarely make this kind of statement to a man, right? So what they should have said is something more like, I know you're going to be great at this. Let me know how I can support you. All right. That's another one. All right. So we have our bingo winners. I wanted to take the remaining few minutes to just ask people if they have any comments or thoughts on what, as a society, we can do, where we should go from here. I would welcome anyone piping up with, someone once said this to me, because I think that it's super important that people hear all the crazy things that get said in a professional setting. Someone who makes trainees going to Antarctica drink through penis-shaped straws sent out my science article to a whole bunch of people. Like, we can't do this as a society, or like as scientists, we can't do this. And so it makes you wonder, like, what is it about that? The disconnect between sending out the science article about sexual harassment and making a trainee drink through a penis-shaped straw to initiate them to the field site is an okay, like, field to navigate, right? So anyway, I want to leave the floor open to other people for questions or just like general comments that you might have. Yeah.
One thing I think about is that
we keep talking about like professional and workplace settings, and I think sometimes we don't treat the field like a professional workplace setting. And so like a reminder to our community that like even when you are sitting in the tent at the end of the day having a beer, you're still in a professional setting. And so like all of this applies at all times in the field.
Yeah, and just following on that, I mean, everybody has this weird thing about thinking about specific times having different norms, right? If I'm camping and a mosquito lands in my cornflakes, I'm going to fish it out and I'm going to eat my cornflakes. If I'm at home, I'll be like, ugh, gross, I'm not eating this. Or if you get it at a restaurant, right? Cornflakes with a mosquito in it, not okay, right? But if you're camping, it's totally fine. So I feel that too. Like, I'm tempted to have different norms in different places, but we have to treat people professionally when we're doing scientific field work.
Following up on that, one thing about Antarctica is that often you have two communities. You've got the people who are going down there to do the science, and then you've got the people who are there for the full year, and they're living down there, and so their norms can be different, and we've seen that kind of collision on occasion. And the other aspect, and this is maybe a question for NSF, is the international aspect of Antarctica, where you do have these cultures with different norms and different expectations. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how much that comes up on the treaty side of things.
First.
That's a really good question, and it hasn't come up a lot, at least that I've been aware of, and Jane kind of alluded to this too, the way the law is set up. It's, unless I'm down there as rep, I back at NSF may never know what's been, but it's something we've thought about, how there's different cultural norms. We even see that within our program, those cultural norms coming out in the way students get treated, for example. So it's really complex. I mean, my view is it comes down to food safety. To get around, not around, but in some ways, as Jane mentioned, the laws are complicated. And in our situation within NSF, we have the most complicated situation. If Earth Science sends a group to Kenya, it's usually one group, not always, but we have a really complicated situation. So in my opinion, my feeling is it's a safety situation. If you're a team, you always are looking after each other. And if you had what happened to Jane happen, obviously the team's not looking after each other. And that to me is a real problem. So, and I'd like to emphasize and contribute, to me, you mentioned the women on women. I mean, bullying, that's a really big one as a female. So I'll throw that one out there as a contribution.
Totally.
So first of all, I want to thank you.
Yes.
For taking us all in favor. You must have taken a lot of courage. I can't imagine how hard it was. I want to say also that I had experiences where I saw women being harassed, and it influenced me how I talked to my two girls growing up, and they are not becoming scientists. Part maybe because of the way of what I told them about what happens, but it also kind of made me not want to spend my time too much with this community because of those kind of examples of psychopathic behavior of men, dissecting relationship history of women, somehow that never happens the other way around, in a field, and it just discourages. It discouraged me. Like, I decided that I'd rather spend more time with my family than with this community. And the other discouraging thing was that, at least in the past, I saw examples of NSF response to reports being totally discouraging and not just kind of almost blaming the reporter rather than the person that the report was made against.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's sorry. Those are all really great points, and I should have mentioned that, that truncated Gaussian distribution, we're also losing men who are horrified by the behavior too, right? We're not just losing the people who are harassed, we're losing people who could be great advocates and allies as well. Yeah.
Can I just throw this back to Alex for a second? I'm about to go down in 2 weeks for my 9th field season. I lead teams. It's extraordinarily unclear what the reporting structure is. I got my RSP 2 weeks ago and it still said report to your PI or point of contact. And that doesn't help Jane 20 years ago. So if that happened right now, she would not be able to report that based on the documentation we get. There's a code of conduct, but it doesn't tell you how to report violations of the code of conduct. So can you clarify what the structure is currently? Thanks, Jane.
Yeah. Thanks, Jane. from the language I've seen for the in-brief, it's going to clarify that tell your team to report to who they feel comfortable with, and then the situation will get worked from there. From our side, the NSF rep, so in Antarctica, in McMurdo, we have 2 people generally at all times. We have the NSF science rep, but we also have the NSF representative that's actually the lead representative for NSF. They're for us, the ultimate conduit, but people need to report to who they're comfortable with, and folks down there will help them get to the right person to report. I wish I could be clear, but I think we're all navigating this together, and you don't want to tell someone, that yes, you have to go through your PI because they're the representative of the institution, when that could be the perpetrator. But that's where they need to find who they're most comfortable with, and as a team, we'll do the best we can to help them. But the important thing is we have a responsibility to report. So I wish it were simpler. I think I don't want to speak for my colleagues here, but it makes us tense. I'm really tense right now. I just have to say, not just because of the content, because I've lived it too. Not nearly as bad, but again, total respect for you doing this. But I think we're nervous because we're navigating new waters for us too, and when we're trying to raise and get clear guidance, I think NSF itself is trying to navigate Title IX, Title VII laws that they're just not cut and dry. That it's so I do wish I had a better answer.
A comment? Is there anything we can do to protect the reporter in a better way? It's my observation that in the past when people have not reported, it's because they've been in an unsafe situation and they don't want it to reflect on their career poorly. People like Jane shouldn't have to wait 20 years to get what they deserve. And I just feel like as a student, I have seen things happen and I have had things happen to me that I don't feel comfortable reporting because I don't know what will happen to my career.
I don't have a good answer for that, but I just want to echo that if everybody who gets harassed now waits 20 years, it's not going to be okay for my daughter. We need to change this. So maybe people can, form sort of a human shield around people so that they feel more comfortable in reporting. So like a career shield. So you can have a group of women or men, of course, or men, who will say, I'm not going to let this person's career be tanked, and have a sponsor, right? A career sponsor for people who are reporting things because they're goddamn heroes. If they report right at the moment, I'm like a really scaredy cat for waiting 20 years until I got tenure.
I would just say one thing about that is that I think sometimes for some people it's having to repeat things over and over again. And I think that, like for example in England, I think they just started recording victims' testimonies. Mm-hmm. And so that might be an option as opposed to having the victim repeat things over and over again. Just a suggestion.
Okay, I know we're short on time, so I just wanted to broaden this out to a really, really common bias that exists. That isn't necessarily harassment, but is certainly a bias. We all, in our professional settings, if we're at a faculty meeting or any other meeting where somebody needs to be taking notes, we say, who's going to take notes? Most of the men's eyes will look toward the women in the room, because you're better at it.
You've noticed that?
I have. And that's not okay.
No, there's so many little things like that too. If you really, it'll drive you absolutely insane. And I just want to, the hot take that's not really a hot take, if we're ending pretty soon, is that if we create a community where everyone is valued for what they are and what they bring currently, and are allowed to fail and say what they want, a lot of these problems that we have with diversity and not having enough senior women will go away, right? And so this is what I mean about like getting rid of the disease. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to. Yeah, something that I have experienced at my university is I'm not a person reporting my own harassment. I've been in a position of trying to help somebody and getting blocked at every step. And this isn't a criticism of what we've done today at all, but I feel that I have not had opportunities to get training in navigating that. And it occurs to me that something we might think of in this community overall is finding people who can actually help train, not the bystander training, but the advocate training. I also think maybe getting professional people to train administrators. I mean, it's like everyone I've talked to cares, but none of them do anything because they don't know how to. Slash, they are worried about it's like at any level in your career, there's always somebody in greater power than you who you worry about. So I'm not sure what I'm advocating there for specifically, but just to raise this as a concern.
Yeah, one problem with having those trainings is that you might get a couple people like you, but we've organized things at our institution and like 2 people show up, right? And so maybe it's great to have 2 people. Maybe that's enough. But yeah, that's a good point. Did you have a...
Yeah. So you're primarily a scientist. How come we haven't heard about your science at all?
What's up?
Well, how have we not heard about your science?
So he did a really great job of both asking me to come here and he said, you know, I don't want you to be pigeonholed as the sexual harassed person. And I was like, that ship has sailed. I am now that person, and I fully embrace it so that other people can learn about it more. And he also said, like, let's have you do a science talk. And I was like, I've never worked on the West Antarctic ice sheet. Please don't make me.
For the record, she does really cool beryllium 10 tracking subglacial meltwater outflow in the Wilkes subglacial basin. So, like, totally relevant science. Talk to her about science. I wanted her to put up a poster too, but
I know I didn't do it.
she's very busy. We need to go to lunch because you only have 29 minutes.